Hi everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio TV. This is your host James, and I'm super excited to be talking to today's guest, Mr. Doug Elwell. At the request of a lot of my listeners, really happy to have Doug on the show. We're going to talk about Planet X, the sign of the Son of Man and the end of the age. You can follow along with today's author at mysteriousworld.com. So I have with me now on the line Mr. Doug Elwell. Doug, you're very welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, James. Appreciate it.
Great to have you here, Doug. I've been excited about this show all week, and I think the listeners will be too. A lot of requests to get you on, Doug. And Planet X is just a fascinating subject from scientific reasons as well as scriptures and our own history. And it seems to be something that's really come to fruition in the last number of years in terms of public consciousness. I guess before we get into any of that, Doug, and the primary reason getting you on today was to talk Planet X, and I'm always interested in the author, Doug. Tell me about your bio. Tell me what got you writing as an author, who you are, what makes you do this research.
Well, as a Christian, I am always looking for the second coming of Christ and wondering when he's going to be returning. And one of the passages in Matthew 24, that is Matthew 24:30, says there's a sign that will appear in the heavens that will herald his second coming. And so I searched for that out of curiosity. What could this possibly be? This was back in college in the late 1980s. And after a series of searches in my spare time into such things as comets, supernova, conjunctions of planets, for some reason I had associated the Star of Bethlehem with the sign of the second coming, because I assumed they would be the same object for some reason. It just seemed to be intuitively make sense. And so when I went through my research in the Star of Bethlehem event, the three main theories were comets, planetary conjunctions, and supernovas. I realized that none of these really fit the description of the Star of Bethlehem event particularly well. So I started looking further afield from regular literature and stumbled upon a book by Zecharia Sitchin called The 12th Planet. And this is outside of a normal field of view, and I thought it was interesting. This is around the time when this sort of thing was starting to become more in vogue and more acceptable to a broader audience. Sitchin's theory was that the Sumerians were aware of this planet, and that that there was a planet in our solar system, what he called a 12th planet, which came in and out of our solar system on a regular basis. Orbital path was like that of a long period comet, but it was actually the size of a planet, maybe 3 to 5 times the mass of Earth or larger. And he believes that the Sumerians were aware of this planet, and then had recorded it in their creation epic called Enuma Elish, which means went on high. And he reinterpreted Enuma Elish, which to that time had more of a naturalistic explanation. According to typical naturalistic theory, which kind of a steady state approach where everything has been kind of the same since the beginning. He instead gave more of a catastrophic approach, where he felt that this the Enuma Elish actually described how a planet had invaded our solar system, conflicted with the outer planets, collided. One of its satellites had collided with Earth. Actually 2 different satellites, and moved it into a position closer to the sun, where it remains to this day. And really this is sort of the penultimate event of not only the Sumerian history, but also of the Bible. This sort of creation act where this giant planet penetrated the Earth, or penetrated the solar system, conflicted with Earth, striking it with the satellites, moving it closer to the sun, giving it its rotation rate, giving it its axial tilt, creating its moon, its atmosphere and oceans and everything else, everything that's unique about the characteristics of Earth was created as a result of this sort of one creation act, which sort of sets the stage as sort of a paradigm for, the entire, not only, Enuma Elish and the Sumerian mythos, but also for the Bible. And I talk about this in my book, based on what Sitchin proposed, that a lot of these references to the dragon is actually a reference to Tiamat as described in the Sumerian mythos. And when I got a graduate degree at Wheaton College in Old Testament biblical studies. My main reason was to learn the ancient Near Eastern texts and the ancient Hebrew, so I could check, is this actually true? And I found that it actually did make sense, that it worked, and there was actually a body of literature that supported this in the mainstream academics. It was a man named Hermann Gunkel who proposed that there was the German theological school who proposed that back in the early 20th century, when these texts from the Sumerians were being published, that this was quite clearly a parallel with the biblical texts, which have numerous references to the dragon in terms of the creation. It's all throughout Job and Psalm 74, mentions of it in Isaiah, where God fought a dragon and created the earth from its body, paralleling the Sumerian texts. So I've been following this pattern, and I wrote an entire book on the subject, not only about the creation of the earth, but also the nativity, and of course the second coming, which I was focusing on, where I believe that Planet X will return and the battle between God and the dragon will resume. That is to say, Planet X and Earth. And that's really the subject of the book, Planet X, the sign of the Son of Man and the end of the age. It's like, this is the resumption of an old battle which will reoccur again in the end times, and which actually is described in the Bible as the resurgence of this dragon character who's mentioned in Revelation 12. And this is a resumption of this old battle, and Planet X will return, and there will be another conflict between Earth and Planet X, which will result in a catastrophic end to human civilization, but also the resumption of a new civilization under Jesus. So that's kind of the whole process of the book. It's not just battles between angels and demons, it's actually battles between planets.
You know, George Smith, when George Smith cracked the Sumerian hieroglyphs, it was because of biblical accounts, I believe. He had understood a lot of the canon scriptures, and it was because of the similarities between those stories and what was in the tales that he was able to make that comparison. It was the epiphany point, so that they had both parallels to draw on, which is why we are able to understand any Sumerian glyphs today. It's because of the biblical accounts, I believe. Yes,
they were able to follow a lot of parallel points because they were both related peoples. They're both Semitic, the Babylonians and Sumerians. Actually, mainly the Babylonians were a combination of Japhethic and Semitic background because the Sumerians were actually the Japhethic people, different race, but they were conquered by a race called the Akkadians, and this created what was called the Sumerio-Akkadian, empire, which indicated, the majority of the history of the Sumerians. So as a result, the Akkadians introduced Semitic concepts into this Sumerian belief system, which is why there's so many similarities between the Bible and the Babylonian creation, because it was kind of a similar ethnological background, and so that's why I have so many similarities. And my theory is that they were both recalling this ancient creation conflict in their different methods. The Bible took a monotheistic approach, whereas the Sumerians, Babylonians took a sort of a polytheistic approach. The same thing. So you have in the Bible, you have God defeating the dragon with the mention of no other deities, and the dragon itself is simply sort of a personification of the sea, metaphorically, whereas in the Sumerian tales, it is actually a deity. And there's numerous other deities which represent the planets. And I talk about this in chapter 2 of my book, where the Sumerians worship the planets as gods, and it made sense that Sumerians Sitchin's interpretation that the Unumeles is actually a description of the battle conflicts between planets made a lot more sense, because the Sumerians actually worship the gods as planets, and so it wouldn't make sense if they weren't gods. If the gods described in the Unumeles were not planets, it wouldn't make any sense, because they worship the planets as gods. And just like Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, these are all names of Roman deities.
Carries on into that culture, yes.
Yeah, that came down from the Greeks, and the Greeks got that from the Persians, and Persians got that from the Assyrians, and the Assyrians got it from the Babylonians, and the Babylonians got it from the Sumerians, all the way back down. The tendency to name the planets after deities and worship them as deities was normative. It was not just talking about silt and sand and natural processes as the more liberal critical scholars would posit. It is actually talking about formation of planets and their conflicts, and specifically about the intrusion of one planet into our solar system, which created a significant change in the orbital and rotational characteristics of many, if not most, or all of the outer planets, including Earth. I'm of the theory that Planet X is actually conflicted with all of the outer planets. That explains why they have so many moons, rings, and why they have axial tilts and so forth, because they should not have formed that way according to standard nebular hypothesis. They should have, they should be all in line with the plane of the ecliptic. They should have, 90-degree angle to the ecliptic in terms of their rotation axis. They shouldn't have any moons or rings of any significance. This rings and moons and rotational tilts indicate catastrophic conflicts. They would not be happening just accidentally. You have to have energy imparted into the system in order for this to happen. Because as we can see from other solar systems, the planets form out of this nebular ring. And there's no reason for them to be tilted or have moons because they're just forming from their parents. And unless their parent adds energy so that they're tilted over, they're just going to copy what their parent is doing, which will be all in line and nice and neat. But they're not. They indicate evidence of intrusive forces from outside of our solar system.
A rogue body, in a way, Doug.
Sorry?
A rogue body. It seems like we've had a rogue body come in and disturb us.
Yes, that's my theory, is that Planet X not only disturbed Earth, but also disturbed all the outer planets at one point or another. We have planet Uranus and Neptune who are tilted on our sides. Uranus is like almost completely tilted on its side, which is totally bizarre. And its rotational and magnetic axes are radically skewed from each other, so that they're like, I think it's about 70 or 80% difference. Wow. So it's like having our North Pole somewhere in North America. That's how different it is. So the Uranus is really, really messed up. And they determined one of the reasons that Planet X theory kind of came back to life in the 1980s is when the Voyager probes passed by Uranus and Neptune, is they found that Uranus and Neptune were kind of a scattershot situation. They're all kind of screwed up, and Uranus has been tilted on its side. Neptune had all kinds of crazy moons with bizarre orbits. Nereid has like a 10-to-1 resonance. It's like, and one of them rotates backwards. It doesn't make any sense unless you have an intrusive object coming in and disrupting them. They couldn't figure out any other way for that to happen. So they determined that the Planet X theory was probably valid because it's the only way you could explain how you have all these disruptions in the outer solar system. And so they came up with the theory that Planet X is actually intruded into our outer solar system sometime in the ancient past, and it came in from beneath the solar system, went up through our plane of the ecliptic and above it. And as it did that, it conflicted probably first with Neptune or possibly Uranus. And as a result, Uranus is tilted on its side, and in the process, Planet X's orbital path came more in line with our ecliptic, and it became captured by our sun. And for a while, it would interact with the outer planets and kind of affect them in bizarre ways, and which is why we are seeing them in such, kind of chaotic fashion. And over time, it would eventually precess, and it would come in conflict with planets closer and closer to the sun, to the point where it actually conflicted with Earth and caused the catastrophism we see now. Well, what's particularly interesting is that which helps support this theory, is if you look at Venus and Mercury, they have none of these characteristics that any of the planets further out from the sun, from Earth on outwards have. They don't have they don't have axial tilts, they don't have fast rotation rates, they have no moons, they have no rings. They're completely different from all the other planets from the Earth on outwards. They have no significant catastrophic impact craters that I'm aware of. So it leads us to believe that these two are pristine examples of how the planets originally formed before Planet X intruded into our solar system. And so the reason you can see, there's an intrusive effect is because planets from Earth on outwards show catastrophic effects, but Mercury and Venus show none of this. So you can see how far Planet X managed to protrude, only as far as the asteroid belt, actually, not Earth, because Earth's original place of orbit was actually the asteroid belt.
What do you think of the IRAS satellite data from, I think it was 83, and probable subsequent cover-up?
The IRAS was an infrared astronomical satellite. It was looking, partly designed to look for Planet X, actually. It was 1983. Mm-hmm. And IRAS was able to determine there were some massive bodies outside of our solar system, or possibly inside of it. But there was so much information in infrared, it was impossible to get through it all and determine what was what. It wasn't like Pluto, where you could use a blink comparator to determine one slide from another.
Yeah.
From the comfort of your cozy study on Earth. They had, and when Clyde Tombaugh found Pluto, he took him, I think, a couple of years to go through all the slides they'd taken from their Earthbound telescope. So, choosing one from the other to see if there was motion between the two. And if there was, that particular object was a planet inside of our solar system. I don't know if IRAS is able to do that. And also, moreover, it took so much more data because it used infrared. You could see a lot of stuff you could not see from a telescope. And so last I heard that IRAS data was so prolific, it was impossible to tell what was what because there was just so much out there. And find what was what. And it might be they found it, but it's not clear. And if they do find it, I seriously doubt they're going to tell us, because it would be a clear and present danger to the Earth if it was coming close.
I don't think they would tell us either, Doug, personally. And you can go conspiratorial all day long with that, but at the end of the day, governments aren't going to create mayhem on the planet. I mean, they're going to keep knowledge like that. I mean, governments have always done that. Kings have always done that, even before major governments of the world. I mean, it's part of a management policy. So I just don't expect, governments. I don't understand why other people expect everybody just to reveal this information. It would be mass riots. People would be robbing stores. It would be like the LA riots on steroids, I think, possibly, Doug.
Yeah. It's not the government's best interest to release that data until the appropriate time. So.
There is something majestic in the land of Ireland. This is known the world over. The Celtic Irish are descendants of the Tuatha De Danann, a mysterious, supernatural race of gods written about in ancient Irish Gaelic texts. This is the basis for all Irish mythology, and our megalithic ancestors are interlinked with these peoples. You have a chance to come and see these monuments and temples for yourself. The megalithic landscape is rich in the realms of myth, legend and wisdom. Come see all this on the most spectacular Sacred Sites tour in March 2016. The Sacred Sites and Equinox tour is not to be missed. Tour highlights include Grillen of Ailloch Observatory, the Giant's Ring Henge and Dolmen, St. Patrick's Day Special at St. Patrick's Ancient Chair, March 17th, Knockmany Passage Tomb linked to the Queen Maeve with special access, Beemore Temple Complex, Dunluce Castle, the Giant's Causeway, Beltany Stone Circle, Kilclooney Dolmen, and the Loughcrew Equinox Event Alignment. Of course, we will see the famous tombs of Newgrange, Noath and Doath, also Fornox Rock Art and Shamanic Chamber, Tara Hill Complex, and we're going to finish at the Tuatha De Danann's origins in the northwest of Ireland at Carrowkeel, dated 3500 BC, and the famous Carrowmore 5000 BC complex. Check out all the full itinerary on the Tours Events page for more details at jamesswagger.com.
Rooms, right? And then you got the inner sanctum.
You can see where this was probably covered over. This overlap here. It would have corbel vaulted and overlapped this chamber here. So this would have had a covering. This would have had a covering. And this is all just backfilled to make the mound up, which has been reduced down to nearly ground level. Yeah, and I think there will be an appropriate time, Doug. I think that's the thing. And I think from what I've looked at it, Doug, in a logical, scientific manner, I think there's something there. I think there's something very worthy of, and I think there's something you can't hide. I kind of, when you look at Planet X, I think, you know, some people are coming at this from a religious scriptures point of view, some people are coming at it from a scientific point of view, but inevitably, both sides are fusing together into Planet X research, Doug. It's funny because I don't know any other subject on the planet that's possibly Giants research as well, but Planet X, it seems to be fusing both sides of that used to oppose each other, science versus religion. Now we have a joint effort to understand this almost phenomena. It is. It's something that's just viral talking point on the internet. It's people are insatiable. Who wouldn't be if we have some big large body out there? I mean, who wouldn't want to know about this stuff?
Well, it's kind of the ultimate holy grail in terms of the greatest of the secrets. I mean, there's another planet in our solar system which might even host life and might even explain one of our theological beliefs, and people want to know about this, and the earthly governments don't want people to know about this because it might be disruptive to their power. And that's what it really comes down to, is when I say revelation of Planet X, it's really might be what the book of Revelation is all about. It might be the revelation of Planet X, in fact. Mm-hmm. My theory in the book is that, I believe it's chapter 4, when you have the theophany of Jesus when he appears on his throne, it might actually be a reference to Planet X appearance. Because I noticed when I was doing my research, it sounded remarkably similar to the theophany of Marduk in the New Elish, and the description of, you know, his throne chariot and all of the satellites that were surrounding him. He had a group of 4 satellites, a group of 7 satellites, which he called great winds. The meaning of spirit in Hebrew basically means wind, and so this could also be translated as spirits. And so, as we see in Revelation, we have a group of 4 spirits surrounding the throne, and another group of 7 great lamps of fire, a group of 4, creatures that surround the throne too. There's a group of 4 and a group of 7 there, and there's this great the description of the throne in the Book of Daniel as this Ancient of Days with this great white flowing hair. The great white flowing hair is basically what a comet is. Comets are called comets because they resemble great white flowing hair. And Planet X is described in the New Elish as having this huge flood storm of a tail, or this kind of these great, typically having these great white wings which look like hair off the sides of the face. So I think what we're having there in the Book of Revelation is actually a description of not just Jesus himself, but actually the planet itself, which he rules over, possibly. And this planet appears like a big, great red face with this hair on either side, depending how the metaphor you want to use. So they're actually describing the appearance of Planet X in Revelation 4, and that is the great secret of Revelation, in my opinion, is actually the revelation of Planet X, which has been hidden this entire time. And it finally becomes, the whole totality of what's been going on is finally and like really, really spectacularly revealed in near the end of the tribulation period, where Jesus returns and this huge planet just suddenly appears because it's comet-like, and comets are covered with this dark organic material, which kind of hides them from visible sight until they come close enough to the sun for their tails to form, which time they become brilliantly visible. I suspect Planet X is like this too. It's kind of this stealth planet which sneaks around in the outer solar system until it comes close enough to the sun to start forming its comet-like tail. But it first starts coming close, it turns kind of a blood red, as it's described in the Sumerian texts. But when it stands as Nibiru, it has its tail, or actually wings, and small tail, and full flight, and it looks incredible. It might cover a large proportion of the sky, like most of the sky, actually.
You know, Doug, a matter of hours ago, not more than about 6 hours ago, I got a message from my co-host, and only because I mentioned I was doing the show on the subject matter today, she asked what show I was doing, and apparently I haven't been able to verify the source. Well, I tried to, but I nearly got hit with a virus, but the Google Sky, apparently that was censoring out the purported Nibiru that was apparently blacked out, has been uncensored. And I typed in to look for the article, Google uncensors Nibiru. And there is a blog article there, and I tried to click on it, and it said, do not open this. I kid you not. So I don't know whether that's true or not, but that's literally broke a few hours ago. Now, if they have uncensored it, apparently it was in Google Sky, and it did show these like horns or like a winged disc.
Yes.
I mean,
it was actually a few months ago. They uncensored it. It's been making its rounds around the internet, but yeah, it looks like very, very much like a Nibiru-like object with the wings that's described in the Sumerian texts.
This is like Ahura Mazda from Zoroastrianism. This is like what was revered across all ancient cultures. This winged disc.
Yes, it was. They remembered the last time it came by, and they remembered it for a long time, and they revered it for a long time as the high chief god of their pantheons. And they didn't name it the same as the god of the Bible, but it was the same kind of concept. It's sort of this chief sky god who ruled over the planets and returned occasionally to inspect things on Earth and judge them if things weren't going well.
I can't, when I read the Enuma Elish, I mean, you can read it two ways. You can say this is all fanciful mythology, or you can apply what we talked about there, and you can try and break it down with planets as gods, and it makes so much more sense. It actually is tangible and logical and somewhat orderly, and you can see what it all means. The story makes sense. And I usually find that when you apply a template to something and it fits, well, then you're probably right. I just can't see any way to reinterpret the Enuma Elish or to interpret it in any other way.
Well, our scientific paradigm has a tendency to get a little carried away, and I think everyone before, maybe about 100 years ago was a total idiot and was incapable of, intelligent thought. And we see, actually, there was a fairly advanced astronomy back in the ancient world. Architecture, of course. The building of the pyramids required a significant understanding of architecture and understanding of stone, working with stone and various materials. But also the ancients themselves said that the gods would come down occasionally and give them wisdom and knowledge and would teach them how to do things. And this is one of those cases, I think, where they showed the Sumerians what had actually happened, and they retained it in their religious epics. Though they retained it in a method that is easy to understand. They used mythology, because the sort of scientific terminology we might use today the understanding of it would be lost after only a few generations. So they put it in a simpler format, using battle between gods and dragons and things, so that when people pass this information down over centuries, thousands of years, the knowledge is much more easy to understand, because people understand this more basic concept than they understand, say, for example, orbital path or perihelion or comet tails and things like that, because most people aren't particularly well educated, particularly back then. And I mean, education is unique to the last 100 or so years. So back then, if you had any education at all, you were considered to be some sort of a genius, and usually the priestly classes and royal classes maintained education themselves only. So I think what their intention was, and it was a wise one, it was to couch it in terms that the average person could understand. It's sort of a battle. And so that the Nima Elish was actually reenacted every year at this festival called the Akidu Festival, which was a kind of a combination of New Year's Festival and the Super Bowl, and also a parade where they had these battles between these mannequins, basically dragon figures and god figures. That they'd run them around in the streets, and they'd have literal physical battles between each other, and there'd be songs. In fact, the Nima Elish was actually sung. It wasn't just a religious text. It was actually a play that was sung or chanted as part of this religious ritual. And some people think that the parts of the songs were actually sung in the same way, and a battle might have been reenacted between God and the dragon in the Hebrew festivals too. Possibly, mainly they used the Ark of the Covenant as representing God rather than a deity figurine, but similar kind of concept. And so this sort of concept of this God between God and the dragon was normative throughout the ancient Near East, and it was only until the 20th century or so when things became much more. It's just really the Renaissance when things became much more rational,
sure,
and more scientific, and we kind of lost the understanding of how things worked back then, how people thought. You have to consider the context in which things are done in order to properly interpret things. And I think that's what a lot of these guys, when they interpret the name of English as just natural processes, they kind of lose the flavor and don't bother to understand what the original authors actually intended. So my book on Planet X, The Sign of the Son of Man, the End of the Age, gets past that. It gets back to the original authorial intent and the context, so you can see what the authors of the ancient texts are actually trying to tell us in context of their world and their worldviews.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly went to a lot of trouble, Doug. They certainly went to a lot of great lengths to act this out and to encode this knowledge and to write it down and document it.
Mm-hmm. There was the central text of their theology of the Babylonians was the Enuma Elish, and they were obsessive about astronomy. They took enormous amounts of astronomical readings. They would foretell omens based on the livers and flights of birds and things like that, trying to understand the will of the gods. If even a small change or in the orbit of a planet, or the apparent orbit of a planet, that would be considered to be an omen. Periods of comets, asteroids striking the Earth, and so forth were big deals. In fact, in my book, in chapter 6, I talk about how the book of Job probably corresponds to the destruction of Sumer back around 2000 BC, which was apparently struck by an asteroid that struck Earth right around 2000 BC or so.
Wow.
And I discovered when I was doing research is that there's actually a huge asteroid crater in southeastern Iraq in the swampy areas, marsh areas, which they believe now struck somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 BC and basically destroyed everything around it. And that would explain why the ancient Sumerians wrote these first of all, why the
Lamentations
Lamentation text. They wrote Lamentation text because their
harrowing,
civilization ended suddenly for mysteriously.
They're harrowing accounts. I mean, when you read the Lamentations of Ur or the Lamentations of, there's a couple of them. I mean, they're heartfelt, harrowing stories.
They're basically describing how the god Enlil, their god Enlil, which they worship as the chief sky god, which replaced Anu and preceded Marduk, which is the Babylonian equivalent. He basically appeared in heaven and threw down a fiery spear, which destroyed Sumer and Ur. And I believe that what happened was this actually a description of an asteroid striking southeastern Iraq and basically destroying everything around it for miles. It was explained in a Lamentation text how they suddenly had this fiery storm, which actually it was this powerful wind which blew through and blew down everything. and then followed by this fire, and then this flooding rain, which is exactly what would happen if you have an asteroid impact. It would have a blast wave followed by fire, followed by rain, because it had fallen in a marsh area, so it probably threw a lot of water up into the air, which precipitated back down in the area around it. So whatever wasn't blasted away by the blast or burned by the fire was flooded up with the flood. So the Sumerian Empire, as we understand it, was destroyed. Now, this is explained why Ur-3 suddenly vanished as an administrative capital, because it was only a few miles away from that area. And so similar events happen in the book of Job, where you have this wind from the wilderness, and you have this fire heaven, and you have all the rest, which destroyed all the cattle and killed people, exactly as described in these lamentation texts. So I think they were probably describing the same event.
Let's bring in the Star of Bethlehem. We've got a big chunk of the book dedicated to this. Let's bring in the Magi and the Star of Bethlehem, and then the new theory as well, Doug.
Okay. Now, my theory is the Magi are actually following the reappearance of Planet X, because it reappears every 2,000 years or so. It previously appeared around the time of the Sumerians, and this was actually when they saw Enlil in the sky. It was actually Planet X returning and passing through the asteroid belt, throwing asteroids around, and one of them apparently hit Earth. 2,000 years later, it reappeared as the Star of Bethlehem, and the Magi, who were the inheritors of this ancient creation tradition, realized from their ancient texts they had access probably to Enuma Elish and also the Bible texts that from the Jews who were in captivity, and probably some other stuff that we're not even aware of. And they calculated, based on the combination of these texts, that this was probably the return of the great sky god, who was predicted apparently in the Hebrew text to have a son born in the town of Bethlehem. I think it was Isaiah. So they kind of cross-reference these texts and follow the star to Bethlehem from Persia, because the Magi come from Persia. There was a caste of Persian peoples known as the Magi, who were the priests and astrologers and philosophers, kind of a scientific caste, but also religious. And they, over a period of probably a couple of months, followed the star southwest actually, to Bethlehem, where they finally found Jesus in the cradle, and wherever you want to interpret that as a cradle or in a cave. Some people think it was a cave. And they found him there and worshipped him and gave him gifts. Probably the reason I think that was a Star of Bethlehem was actually Planet X, because it doesn't fit any of the criteria of the usual interpretations, such as a supernova, comet, or conjunction of planets, because it was said to have moved relative to the background stars and moved ahead of the Magi.
Gotcha.
Now all of the stars have moved, so that's not particularly telling. So you have to have something that moves independently of the background stars, so that eliminates the supernova theory, which supernovas is fixed.
Gotcha.
It could be a conjunction of planets, but conjunctions of planets happen pretty regularly, and there's a couple of conjunctions around that time. And I actually saw a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn recently, a few years back, about a decade back. It happens every 400 or 500 years. And it was very spectacular, and the actual conjunction only lasted a couple of days. And the Magi would have been following this for a few weeks at least. So I didn't think that worked either, because the conjunction didn't last more than a couple of days. Another thing might be a comet. Comets can last for a few weeks depending on how bright they are, and how close they are, and how fast they're moving. But they are uniformly considered to be signs of disaster and not a good thing. So that was not appropriate. Plus, comets come and go all the time. I mean, not just Halley's Comet every 7 or 6 years. You have several comets every decade. I mean, we've had a few since
a few recently, yeah.
Dozen significant ones, and sometimes they get bright. So there was not really nothing any special about the comet. They're relatively common. So I determined that since it had to be moving relative to the background stars, I had to be relatively bright and had to last for a couple of months. So it was probably a planet. And the only significant planet that would be able to appear that would be different from other planets that are well known and well documented would be an intrusive planet in our solar system. So I assumed that it was probably Planet X. It was about due to make an appearance because it hadn't appeared since 2000 BC. And if the Bible is correct, that if we're to interpret the term that Paul described as the day of the Lord is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like one day, I interpret that as actually being a 2,000-year orbital period. 1,000 years, it's like the Hebrew day, which is actually divided into a night and day. So too, the orbital period of Planet X is divided into a night and day. A night of 1,000 years and a day of 1,000 years. So the 1,000 years a day is when the Planet X is approaching the sun, and the night is when it's going out into the darkness of outer space, the deep space, for a total of about 2,000 years. So my theory is that it comes and goes roughly every 2,000 years or so, depending on whether or not it interacts with the outer planets, which might alter its orbit.
Slight perturbations, slightly elongating that cycle or shortening it.
Yeah, it could be variations, which explains why it hasn't shown up for, it hasn't shown up as of 2015, which is 15 years off the 2,000-year mark. You might be right that Sitchin is correct, it's 3,600 years, but it wouldn't explain the star Bethlehem appearance, and it also wouldn't describe the appearance in the sky of Enlil in 2000 BC. And again, I'm thinking probably in our time as well, because people seem to think it's approaching now. A lot of people are convinced this is the end times for various traditions.
Sure.
So that's my theory. Is it's a period of 2,000 years.
In which case
it's around the star of Bethlehem.
In which case, Doug, we're long overdue then.
About 15 years.
15 years overdue.
It's been interacting with the outer planets. Might have been slowed down. Who knows what's actually going on? It might be it's actually approaching. It's just invisible. They suddenly appear in the next few years, and we don't know until it actually happens.
I
But
think
it would have to be pretty close if we wanted to be here in the next 10 years. It would have to be getting close to the orbit of Jupiter if we wanted to see it in the next 10 years, I think.
I think though I don't know. I mean, it's a complex dynamic, but I think with the rising earthquakes, I think we've had more earthquakes in this year than we've had in the last, I don't know, people are saying 10, 20 years, maybe more. Like, it's the earthquakes are ramping up. They're not even reporting them anymore, Doug. They've stopped reporting earthquakes. There are a lot of factors that affect earthquakes between sun, magnetism, tilt of the earth, the moon. There's a few factors. But I think the earthquake data is certainly showing a lot of activity. It would affect a lot of things though, Planet X coming in. It would affect the dynamic of our solar system in many complex ways.
It would have effects on all the planets, and it is described as shepherding the planets. It's kind of seen as this divine shepherd which crosses across the orbits and keeps them in line. That's how the Sumerians described it. But also would have effects on earthquake activity and also solar activity, which might explain solar activity, strangest solar activity.
Again, that's up on the increase too, yeah.
And things of that nature. Apparently floods will occur right before it stands as Nibiru, which means as it passes up through our solar system, the planet the ecliptic and up above it, that's when things will start getting interesting and the floods will start coming in. The really difficult times will come. So we've had some issues recently, but nothing really like what's described in the Sumerian texts and also the Book of Revelation and the other apocalyptic literature out there.
What do you hope somebody to get from reading the book Planet X, the Sign of the Son of Man? Do you have a message for people? Do you just want to present the data so that people can read it in a logical, clear manner and look at the interpretation, or do you have anything that you wanted people to take away from this book?
My main thrust for the book is to kind of clear up the misunderstandings that for biblical, descriptions of the creation and the second coming, because they seem to be fatally flawed, and if they leave out Planet X, which is the main actor, and they seem to have forgotten about this completely, and there's this gaping hole where there's no explanation as to why these things are happening, and what is a sign, and what is the Star of Bethlehem, what caused the creation of the Earth in its present form, why are scientists talking about this catastrophic Planet X intrusion, how is it factoring into the Bible and other ancient texts, and so forth. So my main takeaway for the book is that people need to understand that there's a lot more going on that we're aware of having to do with this planet. This planet is a major factor in Earth history and its future. And you need to understand that when making your life plans. If it's returning in our time, you need to understand you need to make physical and spiritual preparations for that to happen.
So you believe that this planet harbors life, Doug?
It's possible. It's possible it may actually be the throne of God itself, or a throne that he uses, a throne chariot to ride through the solar system. It's a possibility that it's the closest to an angelic civilization of some kind. It's really difficult to say. Or it might just be a barren planet which is used as a sort of cue ball to affect the outer planets in a sort of a billiard table kind of fashion. It's difficult to tell. But it's interesting. It could well host life, even though it's actually a very harsh environment, probably near absolute zero for most of its orbit.
Wow. Well, at the top of the hour, Doug, I mean, unless you want to mention about the Nephilim and angel wars and stuff like that, because there's another section of biblical scripture that, it may be the place where, like you say, angels are harbored on Planet X. I'm open to that. I think the Nephilim is something, if maybe you just want to pass comment on that, it just is begging to be explained too, Doug.
There's no way to tell exactly, because that's probably one of the great secrets, a military secret even, because as I'm actually writing a book on the giants now where I talk about military, not our military, heavenly military. There's a greater war going on outside of our understanding, which may have been going on for thousands or millions of years.
Like a secret war, yeah.
A secret war going on in the heavens. As the type described in Revelation 12, where this battle between the dragon and his forces, Satan and his forces, and Michael and his, and the dragon was cast down to earth. And gets back to my original description of this conflict between the planets. We're going to have these, it's not just the planets, it's also these armed forces, spiritual forces in conflict with each other, using weapons with power beyond imagination. And the ability even to manipulate genetics to create armies of giants to fight on their side, for the fallen angels, that is. And I get into the book on giants, how Satan is basically creating an army of giants to help him in his fight against the war against God. And because they're outnumbered 2-1, apparently, take Revelation seriously, Revelation 12. 1/3 of the angels fell, so they're outnumbered 2-1. Sure. So they can hold off the forces of Michael and his angels, but they can never really conquer them because they're simply outnumbered. So we seem to have kind of a stalemate situation where no force is powerful enough to take over the other, and they're constantly at war with each other, and to the point where it seems to be it's in a stalemate situation. So that's where we're at now. There needs to be a tiebreaker, and that's maybe where Planet X comes in to punch through the forces and really take the fight to the enemy.
Sure. And, wow, well, I'm really excited about that book when it comes out, Doug, so you keep me posted on that. Planet X, The Sign of the Son of Man and the End of the Age. Fascinating read, Doug. I think, again, with just to recap on the 2000 periodicity, it certainly makes a lot of sense to me, and it explains the Enuma Elish and the time of Christ and Star of Bethlehem, and I know I'm never too sure on the 3600 year ops. Again, these are the intricacies that I think it's people like yourself that get into this research, Doug, that provide this knowledge from history and mythology and religious scriptures and the hard science too, and looking at this puzzling origins of ourselves and our place on the planet and all these different cultures. And I just think these are the little intricacies we should be talking about in an intellectual manner, trying to figure this stuff out, because it's pertinent to man on the planet. But unless you've got any final comments, Doug, I'll wrap it up with that.
That sounds good. That's a good comment.
Well, thank you, brother, and appreciate your time today. I look forward to the new book, Doug.
All right, thank you. When these texts from the Sumerians were being published, that this was quite clearly a parallel with the biblical texts, which have numerous references to the dragon in terms of the creation. It's all throughout Job and Psalm 74, mentions of it in Isaiah, where God fought a dragon and created the earth from its body, paralleling the Sumerian texts. So I've been following this pattern, and I wrote an entire book on the subject, not only about the creation of the earth, but also the nativity, And of course, the second coming, which I was focusing on, where I believe that Planet X will return and the battle between God and the dragon will resume. That is to say, Planet X and Earth. And that's really the subject of the book, Planet X, the sign of the Son of Man and the end of the age. It's like this is the resumption of an old battle which will reoccur again in the end times, and which actually is described in the Bible as the resurgence of this dragon character who's mentioned in Revelation 12. And this is a resumption of this old battle, and Planet X will return, and there will be another conflict between Earth and Planet X, which will result in a catastrophic end to human civilization, but also the resumption of a new civilization under Jesus. So that's kind of the whole process of the book. It's not just battle.
An author, who you are, what makes you do this research?
Well, as a Christian, I have always looking for the second coming of Christ and wondering when he's going to be returning. And one of the passages in Matthew 24, that is Matthew 24:30, says there's a sign that will appear in the heavens that will herald his second coming. And so I searched for that out of curiosity. What could this possibly be? This was back in college in the late 1980s. And after a series of searches in my spare time into such things as comets, supernova, conjunctions of planets, for some reason I had associated the Star of Bethlehem with the sign of the second coming, because I assumed they would be the same object for some reason. It just seemed to be intuitively made sense. And so when I went through my research in the Star of Bethlehem event, the three main theories were comets, planetary conjunctions, and supernovas. I realized that none of these really fit the description of the Star of Bethlehem event particularly well. So I started looking further afield from regular literature and stumbled upon a book by Zecharia Sitchin called The 12th Planet. And this is outside of my normal field of view.
Hi everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio TV. This is your host James, and I'm super excited to be talking to today's guest, Mr. Doug Elwell. At the request of a lot of my listeners, really happy to have Doug on the show. We're going to talk about Planet X, the sign of the Son of Man and the end of the age. You can follow along with today's author at mysteriousworld.com. So I have with me now on the line Mr. Doug Elwell. Doug, you're very welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, James. Appreciate it.
Great to have you here, Doug. I've been excited about this show all week, and I think the listeners will be too. A lot of requests to get you on, Doug. And Planet X is just a fascinating subject from scientific reasons as well as scriptures and our own history. And it seems to be something that's really come to fruition in the last number of years in terms of public consciousness. I guess before we get into any of that, Doug, and the primary reason getting you on today was to talk Planet X, and I'm always interested in the author, Doug. Tell me about your bio. Tell me what got you writing.
What I thought was interesting. This is around the time when this sort of thing was starting to become more in vogue and more acceptable to a broader audience. Sitchin's theory was that the Sumerians were aware of this planet, and that that there was a planet in our solar system, what he called a 12th planet, which came in and out of our solar system on a regular basis. Orbital path was like that of a long period comet, but it was actually the size of a planet, maybe 3 to 5 times the mass of Earth or larger. And he believes that the Sumerians were aware of this planet, and then had recorded it in their creation epic called Enuma Elish, which means went on high. And he reinterpreted Enuma Elish, which to that time had more of a naturalistic explanation, according to typical naturalistic theory, which kind of a steady state approach where everything has been kind of the same since the beginning. He instead gave more of a catastrophic approach, where he felt that the Enuma Elish actually described how a planet had invaded our solar system, conflicted with the outer planets, collided. One of its satellites had collided with Earth, actually 2 different satellites, and moved it into a position closer to the sun, where it remains to this day. And really, this is sort of the penultimate event of not only the Sumerian history, but also of the Bible. This sort of creation act where this giant planet penetrated the Earth, or penetrated the solar system, conflicted with Earth, striking it with the satellites, moving it closer to the sun, giving it its rotation rate, giving it its axial tilt, creating its moon, its atmosphere and oceans and everything else, everything that's unique about the characteristics of Earth was created as a result of this sort of one creation act, which sort of sets the stage as sort of a paradigm for, the entire, not only, Nume Elish and the Sumerian mythos, but also for the Bible. And I talk about this in my book, based on what Sitchin proposed, that a lot of these references to the dragon is actually a reference to Tiamat as described in the Sumerian mythos. And when I got a graduate degree at Wheaton College in Old Testament biblical studies, my main reason was to learn the ancient Near Eastern texts and the ancient Hebrew, so I could check, is this actually true? And I found that it actually did make sense, that it worked, and there was actually a body of literature that supported this in the mainstream academics. It was a man named Hermann Gunkel who proposed that there was the German theological school who proposed that back in the early 20th century